Look it up. Hello, everyone. Are we ready? All right.
You have taste
No?
in a way that's meaningful to software people.
Don't say Rust.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates.
I would recommend TypeScript. Yeah, it writes a lot of code for me, and usually it's slightly wrong.
I'm reminded, incidentally, of Rust here.
Rust. This almost makes me happy that I didn't become a supermodel.
Cooper and Netties.
Well, I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about large neural networks. It's really an honor to be here.
Rust.
Data topics.
Welcome to the data.
Welcome to the Data Topics podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Data Topics podcast. Not sure if it's plugged or unplugged or what is it now, but it's your casual corner. What is it? It's your casual corner of the web where we discuss all about metadata management. My name is Murillo. I'll be hosting you today. My co-host today. It's a special one. It's Ben. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Murillo.
Nice. I was about to. Thanks, Alex. How are you doing, Ben?
Great. Very happy to be here. Very happy to be your co-host.
Yes.
It's an honor.
The honor is all mine. You've been a guest before at the Data Topics, I think maybe 2-3 times, maybe?
Yeah, I think, 2 or 3 times.
And you're like, man, I can't get enough. Can I do
Yeah.
this every week,
I need to
every
be there.
day?
I had so much fear of missing out. I just need to be here.
No, but for the people that haven't watched the previous episode, do you want to describe a bit, introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ben, indeed. I've been working at Dataroots for exactly 3 years now. It's an anniversary.
Wow.
No button hit for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He just,
Yeah, so 3
he
years
just,
at,
he just wanted to. Can we have the money sound instead, actually? Just Oh, okay. It's okay. It's okay. Oh, there we go.
But so 3 years at Dataroots within the data strategy business unit. So really focused on creating data strategies for companies, identifying use cases, leading projects. Currently working at Telenet Telco as a AI product manager, you could say. So leading a team there, which is building very, very interesting and impactful intelligence. Other than that, I think indeed I've been part of the podcast before. And so now the idea is to become co-host and invite some very, very talentful people from the data scene in Belgium. So very much looking forward to that.
Very nice indeed. I think so. I think we mentioned in the previous episode, the idea is to alternate a bit more towards customer facing, something more tech related. So you'll be seeing more Ben, maybe seeing both of us, maybe just Ben, maybe just me, but we'll see what the future brings. But really happy that you're taking this up as well. And we also have a very nice guest. We have a very special guest. First time on the podcast.
Yep.
Corentin.
Perfect.
This is a good, how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, Corentin.
Corentin.
Yeah,
Okay.
Perfect pronunciation.
I did my best. I did my best. So what brings you here? Would you like to introduce yourself to
Sure.
everyone as well?
Yeah, so my name is Corentin. I recently joined Dataroots, so 1st of March. So 2 months and a half now, something like that. And yeah, I've been working in data for, let's say, 4 years, something around 4 years. It's a bit muddy. I didn't start working in really like data fields per se. I actually first studied sociology and anthropology, and I did some research and teaching at the university. And there I had like various, let's say, interest into quantitative methods, so a bit of statistics, and also anything related to cognitive psychology, economics, and cybernetics, more in a theoretical approach. But yeah, so basically thinking about systems is something that really interested me. And then for various reasons, I decided to leave the academia. I'm a proud PhD dropout. Let's call
Nice.
it like this. But yeah, no, there was a lot that I liked there. And I think I actually took a lot from that time into consulting. I think like being able to think about organization, structures, systems operation, and that kind of thing. The technical part you can learn, but the more holistic approach, sometimes it's a bit more difficult to train in. So that was really nice. And yeah, I did a bit of data analysis afterwards, data engineering a bit, then transition to data management, being able to have my hands into many different pies. And yeah, so basically anything related to information system, information technology, really, really interests me. And so that's why metadata came also like a bit naturally when I arrived at Dataroots, talking to colleagues and managers like, okay, what are our capabilities? What do we want to focus on? And then, yeah, metadata management was clearly like a good fit.
Sounds great.
It's one of the things I really like about working in data. You have people coming from all types of backgrounds, like you told us a few moments ago, anthropology and sociology. Yeah, it's really nice.
The PhD was in that as well.
Yeah, like it was in economic anthropology. And so I spent in total like 2.5 years in Ghana.
Oh, wow.
Like doing some field work, real estate dynamics, land dynamics, and social inequalities in a mining town.
Wow. Super interesting.
So we did some mining before.
Yeah. It's like different type of mining.
Yeah.
I've been a miner for decades. Very cool. And now you mentioned metadata management. Last episode with Paolo, we touched a bit on metadata management.
Yeah.
Or metadata per se. Well, how would you describe metadata?
Yeah, so that's always the question of definition, which is always a bit tricky. So basically, like we have these, let's say, common sense definitions. Like you will hear metadata, it's data about data.
Yeah.
Like that's what everybody says, which is not incorrect. Like sure, we can see it like this, but very quickly we actually need to parse a bit that definition, because it's at the same time it's clearly like underdefined. It doesn't really help that much. But also what is a bit more striking is that even that definition is not really properly assessed for what it means. Because if metadata is data about data, it's still data. So anything that we've learned from data management, should I expect to find it in metadata management? And some of it will apply, some of it won't. But it's sometimes a bit shocking to see how, I mean, it's a bit, maybe it's a bit unfair or a bit a caricature to say it like this, but I feel that in terms of metadata management, most of the time we are still a bit in the Stone Age, like filling in form manually, like doing a lot of manual works, very disconnected from the processes, the value stream. Like it feels a bit like a remote function that is not really important. And things are done a bit out of duty. Like people know, oh, okay, yeah, we need some governance, we need some metadata. So
It's
we
like,
put to...
It's like broccoli, right? Like you have to eat
Yes.
it, you have to do it. It's like, okay.
Exactly.
It's like
Exactly the same.
it's exact.
Yeah.
See, put that on the metadata is like broccoli. Metadata equals broccoli.
But what you say is true. I think always when I'm involved with metadata initiatives, it's always like associated with data governance, and it's always a subpart of that. So would you advocate for having a clear full focus on metadata management, or what's your vision on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, I'm pretty opinionated about those kind of question, in the sense that we need to separate between having a clear vision about our craft, what we do. So there, being able to differentiate between governance, metadata, data, and even within metadata, being able to really pinpoint at different types of architecture and processes, that's super important. But when we talk to stakeholders, there, I would say it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like we should go out of this, bounded domains. I'm doing data governance, or I'm doing metadata management. That doesn't interest anyone in business. Like they don't care. They don't care about your field. They don't care about your specialization, nor should they. Like it doesn't mean anything. What is important is you have a value stream, you have business processes, you have basically a production system. The question is, how can you help? That's the only question that matter. How can you drive value? That's it. It sounds super cliche, and when people hear that, they're like, yeah, okay, you just stick like the word value onto something, but it's actually, it really needs to become an obsession. Yeah.
I agree. I agree, and I think in my career as well, as I don't know, developer. I don't know if I should call myself a developer, but anyways, like coding, doing stuff, whatever, programming. I also feel like there's even an article that resonated with me that's like the undercover generalist, because you kind of become more and more broad. I guess some people do become very, very specific, but I do feel like it benefited me. It's also more interesting to me to have a bit of a broader view as well and understand more. But the thing on the other point though, I also think, so in that sense, I fully agree with you. We shouldn't focus on I'm doing X, Y. It's like I'm get the job done. Like it doesn't matter how you would say AI engineer, data strategy, whatever. Like, but then on the other hand, I also see the benefit to convince people, right? I can say I can do all sorts of things, but then it's like, okay, but how do I know you do well, right? And I think specialization is kind of brings that credibility to the table. So I think it's not not because we have to. I think like we should just worry about getting the job done. But I think before someone knows you, to find out what that expertise is that you have and to kind of bring them around the table. I think that's when I think the roles and the scopes come in place.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And actually that expertise needs to be expressed in terms of real processes. What I mean by that is that, okay, what have you handled in terms of systems in the past? Like, are you able to, let's say, automate some kind of processes using some kind of tools? Those are the really like tangible expertise that then can translate into business outcome. But I feel that if we go back to metadata management, I feel that there is sometimes a bit of a pitfall, let's say, with this idea of standard or best practices. And I think we've relied in the past a bit too much on frameworks, like governance framework.
Can you give a few examples?
So, for example, let's say you have this idea that in an organization you should know where things are. That sounds quite basic, right? Like, and yeah, sure, that's a good, that's a good goal, that's a good objective. But should you start there, and should it be your only focus? So basically, cataloging assets, is it really the best, use of your time? And there it becomes more complicated. But I feel that most of the time we kind of roll out like a familiar script, like in data and metadata management, where you're like, okay, I have to do metadata management. So I guess we'll look for a catalog, and then we start, ingesting stuff in it. Like it sounds like a caricature, but it really, most of the time, it's kind of like that. And I don't think it's good. I don't think it's the right approach.
What would be the right approach then?
So usually, the way I see things is I mentioned like the term production system. I think that's really the way to go to. And that's, in the past, I've been coached a bit into TPS, so Toyota Production System, lean management, and that kind of thing. And I'm not like a zealot in any kind of framework. I think there are interesting pieces left and right, but it's more like to spark a bit your imagination. But in this kind of approach, what you're looking for is to go on the shop floor. So if you think about like, automotive industry and stuff like that, you have an assembly line, you have a shop floor where things are actually happening. Things get, screwed and soldered and built, right? So this is the first place you should go to, like look at how things are working or not working. There, you start seeing problems, you start seeing pain points. And of course, there will be like many root causes, but I guarantee you, metadata is very often like part of what is going wrong. Because if you take a step back, you're like, okay, maybe information was missing. There was a change that wasn't foreseen. Like very broad categories of problems like that, but we can go into more details. It can be like a schema change, those kind of things. But basically, information should be flowing, and it's not. Information should be used, and it's not.
Mhm.
Information should be rich enough, and it's not. And so when you start assessing those kind of problems and pain points, you have your use case. So basically what we try to do is also to advocate to our partners and clients, and to stop looking at things in a way that is kind of predetermined. Like, okay, I have to do metadata management. I'll check for a catalog, and then I'll do a POC, and then we'll take it from there. No,
Mhm.
go see what is being used, where are the pain points, and then start fixing things.
Yeah, I like what you're saying a lot because I really like the pragmatic approach. I think the challenge is if okay, and this is not what you said, and I think that's the fear that some people have, that you just do things without a plan.
Yeah.
And then you take too many one-way doors. And I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
one-way doors. Like when I say this, maybe for people, I mean, maybe someone doesn't. You know what's not like one-way doors, two-way doors? A while ago, but I'll explain it again. But basically, the way I think of one-way doors and two-way doors is one-way doors are decisions that are hard to go back, right? So, for example, if you choose a database, that's more of a one-way door than a two-way door. But like, where are you gonna put this class in your code? That's a two-way door. You just change it, move from one place to another. Very easy. And I think that the challenge is to make too many one-way door decisions because you're just solving the problem you have at hand. But then as you unfold, you realize that you cannot generalize, or you cannot. And I think sometimes in the fear of that, people go with the battle test. Like, yeah, cataloging stuff is not going to be like it's very difficult. It's hard for me to think how that would be a one-way door and not a two-way door. How it's. So I think people tend to rely on the things that they're very low risk in the way. Like, it's not going to be a wrong decision. But they sacrifice that with pragmatism, and it doesn't really bring a lot of value. And then it feels like more broccoli. It feels like something you have to do, but not something that you do because it makes sense.
I agree. You don't want to spend a lot of time on just cataloging metadata for the sake of it. It needs to have a purpose, a clear goal. That will be your starting point, and then afterwards you indeed want to identify the gaps. But how do you typically do that? Would you just go to the floor and just observe them and do interviews, or?
Yeah, actually, that's where it's a bit funny, because it relates to what I was doing before, right? The kind of field works in anthropology and so on. So basically what you do is, you go meet people, and can be anyone, can be a data analyst, business analyst, data engineer. I usually take the example of data quality because it's
because you like Paolo, and Paolo will be proud.
Yes, exactly. I want to make Paolo proud.
Exactly.
But
don't we all?
Yeah. But no, it's usually like a main concern in many companies, right? Like increasing data quality. And what you do is basically you try to first see how people are handling those kind of issues. And then it's to your point about like one-way door and two-way doors. It's very difficult to get trapped into a one-way door, let's say, situation if you constrain yourself with really like iterative development and really short release cycle of anything that you do. So even if you get it wrong, that's what I usually say to different stakeholders, because there is this fear of, okay, if we go too fast, we're going to make mistakes. And I'm like, yeah, but to take your example, if you pick the wrong database, right, that's a very costly mistake. But actually, not a lot of decisions are like that with metadata. And you can always approach it in an incremental way. And before going for a full-blown like implementation of a data catalog, metadata hub, and so on, start like just sharing the information. I can even give it in the simplest way. It's like give the information in person and see what it does. Like if you have an incident handling process, like just spend some time with data engineer, data analyst, and look at the gaps in terms of information and the amount of time that they will spend, for example, getting some context information about an incident. and then try to see, okay, if you have this information from the get-go, does it help? Does it reduce time to resolution? And if it's a yes, great. Then you know you can start from there. And even if what you build is, let's say, suboptimal in the future, you can replace it. But if it's small enough, the cost of replacing it will already be paid for by clear return of investment of what you built. So that's the shift that we need to have. Like, think about value, think about the value that you are deriving from what you build. And then if you have to upgrade, if you have to replace, if you have to change something, it's fine. Like, it's part of life. What I've seen is that people are trying to build like the perfect architecture, like with the perfect design, all the processes, and they are brilliant, right? And then they really design what would be the perfect architecture. And then it takes like years. And then you know what? The organization itself, the company, changes. So there is a reorganization. And then suddenly you have to do it all over again. So you will not get away from incremental and iterative development. So of course, there are some guidelines that you need to follow to build like loosely coupled, lightweight components. But if you follow that, I mean, I don't really like this opposition between, let's say, tactical and long term. For me, it's not really about that. It's about like, is it yielding more value than what I put for, like what I put in? And if it's yes, then it pays itself.
Yeah, and you're mentioning value and what you put forth, and it's hard not to think of like ROI when you say these things, right?
Yes.
The return on the investment. And I think it's also a refreshing way to look at it, because if you want to keep the same ROI, but and you invest a lot, you need to have a lot of returns, right? So you almost like safeguarding yourself as well to say, let's just do smaller now and see if we get value back.
Absolutely.
Maybe bless you, Ben.
Almost.
Are you also, so you mentioned it's with metadata, it's these decisions are not like the one-way door decisions are, bless you.
There it is.
With the metadata management, these one-way door decisions don't happen as often, you
I
mentioned.
mean, depends on how you approach it, right? But if you start, let's say, your metadata management initiative with the choice of a license for a data catalog, I would say like 99% of the time, that's not a good idea.
Okay.
Because usually what we see is that first, the people who are going to make that decision don't have like, let's say, enough information about how things are really working. So how can you pick, like, that's the thing, right? Like, I want to trying to make it clear, and I'm thinking as we go along. So sometimes it gets a bit like confused in my head, or not confused, but I try to say too many things at the same time. But to pick your example, when you have data management and you have, let's say, the choice, you have to pick a database. What usually happens is that you don't have the database that you're looking for, right? So maybe you already have like some source application, some things like that, but you don't have, a database. And then you need to pick one.
Yeah.
That's very easy because, I mean, it's not easy, but it's clear.
Just go with Postgres.
Yeah, it's clear because actually it's going to kind of from scratch, unless you're doing a migration, for example. But for metadata management, the reality is the metadata are already there. Like the flows of informations are already there. When people, like, I don't know, discuss about things like around the coffee machine, this is something that sometimes is called like tribal knowledge. So you have, for example, flows of knowledge, but it's just because people know about it. It's not documented anywhere. They discuss about it. They onboard a new colleague, those kind of things. So those already exist. So if you have in your perspective, oh, let's start doing metadata management, and we don't have any platform, we don't have any tool, so we are starting from scratch, that's already wrong. You're not starting from scratch. You already have a full ecosystem of information flows. It's just that you don't know about them, maybe, or they are incomplete, or they are fragmented, but they're already there. Like, you cannot stop generating metadata.
And would you tackle that proactively, or would you, because how these issues often come up is while building machine learning models or while building dashboards, and then you see gaps in the data, and then it becomes an issue, and then you need some time to go to the people to fix the issues. And so would you then do it proactively and do like something similar to a metadata maturity assessment or something? Or
Yes, I mean, you can do a lot proactively, but I think we also need to be realistic. And it sounds weird, but that's also something that I think it's good to be clear with clients and partners. You are going to fail. And it sounds weird to say it like this, but this is part of the journey. It's impossible to plan everything in advance, and it's impossible to have like perfect execution. And in the case of metadata, because it's always generated, because it's always there, and because you have like basically a lot of flows, you cannot learn about these before starting the work. So you are not going to stop everything. You are not going to stop your value stream, right? And say, oh, we first need this first step to do metadata management right, and then we go to the second step and so on. No, you already have your flow. You already have your stakeholders. Like you said, you already have some dashboard lives. They are not working. So that is the reality of metadata management. It's a reality of failures, in a sense. So if we are not able to process that and like learn from failure, then it's not going to work. And what we see is that most of the time people get away from the situation as is. They contemplate a platform, a new tool, and there nothing is failing because it's aside. It's their secret garden. And then they, plant the seed, and they really wanted to make it really perfect and nice, like this kind of Eden. And that's just a dream. That's a complete mirage, because when they import it and they plug it into the real world, again, everything is on fire. So it's better to just go on the shop floor, see where the failures are, and incrementally improve the reality. That's how you should do it.
And in that sense, it sounds a lot like any other software problem, right? Like there's an issue,
Exactly.
let's just solve this. One question on that, and I think goes back a bit to the previous discussion we had when data management is often linked with governance. I think you hinted at it, but I don't know if you said explicitly. Would you advocate for separating the two ideas, or do you think they still go very hand in hand?
So I would say, I mean, it's a kind of a non-answer, but I would say it's really dependent on the business and organizational landscape. So, because
are you a consultant?
yes, it depends. That's the magic, phrase. But no, in to be honest, like, yes, it goes hand in hand. But when you think about it, metadata is unbounded. It's a completely unbounded domain. Why? Because first, anything can generate metadata. Like your camera generates metadata. A knowledge base, a wiki is considered metadata. The description of a column is metadata. And I could go on and on and on. So metadata are everywhere. So already, okay. And then the worst part is that it's completely recursive. So metadata is just a matter of perspective. So I'm going to give like a clear example. Let's say you have column names, right? That's part of the physical attribute of the tabular data. But then what kind of words do you use? And how do you define it? So you have column description. That's one level of metadata. But then in that descriptions, do you use like specific terms that mean something for business? Then you have a business glossary. That's a second layer of metadata. And then that business glossary, it's going to be updated. Some entries are going to be created, modified, deleted. So you will have timestamps on those operations on your business glossary. That's another layer of metadata. And so an entry in your business glossary, is it data or metadata? It depends. It depends where you look at things.
And
So-
maybe also like it depends, and when does it matter that we make the distinction whether it's just data or metadata?
To me, it almost doesn't. That's the. I mean, I don't know if it's a bold claim or if it's just like common sense. Like I'll let people decide. But to me, I didn't find it to make an impact to label it data or metadata. In any case, it's information. The question is, when is that information needed? For what purpose? And is it fit for purpose? Those are the only questions that you need to follow. Whether it's data or metadata, I don't care. And I don't think like a data engineer or a business analyst that needs the information to release, for example, a new data product is going to care if we solve data management or metadata management.
Mm-hmm. I think, and I agree with you, because that's also was my first thoughts. Like, if it really depends so much, and like indeed it makes sense with that vague definition of data about data, right? But then I'm also wondering, I mean, and maybe that's also why in my head as well, when I think of metadata management, I do link it more to the data governance, because if you think of governance, you think of maybe less like, then there's someone that can implement the solution, but there's someone that is responsible, right? So if you think of like a Raki scenario, for Raki scenarios, like it's like people that don't know about Raki, is like a matrix. You can put like tasks, and then each task has like a persona, let's say, and that persona can have a role, which is responsible, informed, consulted, or responsible, accountable, consulted, informed.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, that's why it says Raki. Yeah. And the reason why I think of this is because data governance and metadata management feels like the situation where the manager is a non-technical person, because they're the ones that know exactly what is the real life, right? Like if I say, I don't know, this is, I don't know, stupid examples, but X is this, it's not going to be the developer that is going to be the one to say, yeah, that's actually how the business goes, or that's how a sales process goes, or this is how what we should focus on. But the developer is the enabler, right? So the developer is the one responsible for making sure these things are possible, but who's actually accountable, or who's the one that is going to ask the questions, or who's the one that's the end responsible is. So you have the trickiest Raki scenarios when you have one task that someone is responsible, but and the other person is accountable, but not both, right? And I think maybe that's also why when I think of metadata management, because indeed, like metadata, data management for a lot of these cases the same. When I think of the metadata management problems, I think a lot of these data governance and data management, because then now I'm building something, but if you need to check what's the latest update on the business glossary and who made the change, is that person still in the company, if I need to ask questions, you need to have access to this platform, and you have a different way of looking at things. So then you start getting these conversations of, okay, maybe, and then you go to the one-way door discussions, like do you want to use Soda, because Soda has this UI that you can transfer things from one another, and this needs to be linked to creating tickets about incidents, and you need to be able to pass tickets from one team to another, because now we don't need to be able to speak the same language, right? And I think that's, I mean, and I'm not saying that every metadata management task escalates to all of this that I'm saying, but I think that's where I found the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
When you start having too many cooks in the kitchen, because everyone is going to have an opinion, everyone's going to have a different need, but because we need to have the same layer of communication, the same channel, we kind of need to agree in some way. And then you start with the one-way doors, like, okay, if I develop my whole solution in Soda, and then tomorrow I say, okay, Soda is actually not this, we need to go to DBT, whatever, then maybe that's a bit of a one-way door that it can be expensive.
Okay.
Not sure if it's expensive enough to justify not making this decision, but I think that's what I've seen with my eyes. Like, even like you mentioned like the Garden of Eden as well, and I've seen the teams like discussing for like years.
What I hear you saying is that it's business dependent.
I think it is business dependent, but I also think that the biggest challenge is, and I think, again, when I think of metadata management, I think my head also goes to the link with data governance, because I also think of the two parts between the non-technical and the technical, and there are different people, and the technical people have to talk to different people, and the non-technical talks to different people as well, and then everything becomes a bit more entangled. And I think that entangledness is the biggest challenge that I attribute to more metadata management, because, like I said, all the other things I could just say just data management, it's just data engineering, it's just this, it's just that. We have solutions for this. We don't need a new name.
Yeah. Okay, so it's super interesting. Like, I would agree with a lot of what you said. I would slightly push back on maybe two different things that for me are kind of the reasons why we get stuck so much in those kind of issues that you really like beautifully like laid out. The first thing is that in data governance, I think that sometimes we tend to, like you mentioned, Raki, for example, right? What is interesting is that in all the dimensions that you explained, there is no capabilities. Like, we think a lot about roles, responsibilities, processes, accountability, having someone in charge, those kind of things. It's all on paper. It's all about organization. What I'm usually focused on is capabilities. Now, of course, it needs to be clear, like, the scopes and stuff like that. You cannot have like contradiction.
Yeah, because if you go to the floor at the Toyota plant and you want people to input more metadata, you need to convince them.
Yeah.
And afterwards, when people are convinced, you need to maintain it, you need to follow up.
Yeah.
So there is a clear business involvement. And so in my opinion, organization is super important.
Yes, but so my point is that yes, organization, involvement, all those kind of things are super important. But how do you drive that? And for me, if I take from software engineering kind of ethos, you have this very well-known, principle. You build it, you own it, right? Because software engineers and other kind of professions are keenly aware that if you build something, it also has a cost. Like, you have to manage it, you have to maintain it. And what I'm sometimes a bit worried is that in data governance, for example, or in data metadata management, whatever, like the fields don't really matters. But what we do is like we say, oh, okay, we're going to craft like this business process, or we are going to say this person is responsible for this and that. What is the cost that is taken up by the people who design this process? Nothing. Like, I can define so many processes. I can point to someone and say, you are going to be the data steward accountable for X and Y. But am I building the capabilities, including on the IT side, including in terms of automation, augmentation, to actually make that workload viable? And I cannot know that and do that if I'm not on the shop floor. So that's why in TPS, you have this, principle, this ethos that managers and people with decision power have to actually go to the shop floor. And the other way around, you have like those kind of PDCA and Kaizen and stuff like that reported back to the management, where the operations are always in view. Like, you always need to look at the real operations. And so I feel that's what sometimes it's a bit lacking. So yes, metadata and data governance, absolutely, but we need to be very clear about like building capabilities. So that's the first part of it.
Maybe just before we move on, because I agree with you, and I think there are a few challenges in this for software, because I do think that the learning curve for a lot of managers is very steep. So it's like, to really understand what the problem is and what the solution is, for a lot of times it's very difficult. But I fully agree. I fully agree that this should be the standard. Like, if you as a leader, you don't have the know-how, maybe then you should have someone that you trust to do these things. I also agree that it's very important. And I also I think in general, whether it's explicit or not, I agree that you build your own ethos. But I also think with metadata and knowledge and all these things, it's a bit slippery, because I think you always generate knowledge, you always generate this, with whether you're aware or not, and it's not as always transparent, right? Like, if there is I don't know, if I figure out a faster way to do X and I start doing this and people start copying me, and then someone has a question, it's like, yeah, maybe but it was not like I consciously generated this knowledge, right? You mentioned about tribal knowledge, the coffee machine things. So I also think I think ideally, yes. Ideally, that's how, I mean, and I think that's also, to my head, that's what the metadata management is kind of about, is like kind of try to put this on paper, but it's like trying to see what happens and just codify in a way that it flows more efficiently.
Yes, but I really want to jump in there because that's really crucial. And yes, but I would say to continue almost the metaphor of saying like writing it on paper. I would say yes, but it needs to be the right paper. What I mean by that is that I'm going to give you a very concrete example. You have like the whole data quality things where you have data quality checks, like you have incidents and so on. What is really interesting, if you think about information flows, is that a lot of the data quality checks, right? You have some generic checks, sure, but you have also like specific checks on specific data products. And there, if you see where this information originates, it originates not from business, not from IT. And I'm someone who really, I kind of dislike this opposition. I think we are taking it way too far. Like we are creating tribes. And when you look at the shop floor, actually business and IT need to work together a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like designing and building a data product, right? And I'm using data product here in a very loose way. Like it doesn't have to be tied to any kind of architecture. But what you have is you have business requirements. Usually it starts with that, right? Like you are not building like out of thin air. So you have business requirements and you actually have acceptance criteria. And this is something that is very well known in software engineering.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you have like big fan. Like actually, I've learned about it like a couple of years ago, talking to software engineers, really like getting into BDD, right? Like behavior-driven development.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we need to do. Like basically, your acceptance criteria are going to be the same kind of information that you want to find in your data quality checks. Now, in terms of metadata management, I look at this and I'm like, great. But we end up with this flow of information not flowing, and we have to redo the work. Basically, you have your acceptance criteria that guides your development, and then another person will probably write the data quality checks. The information, the contextual information on those checks will be relatively poor. Then another person, because you also have employee churn.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations don't like to think about that, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's the reality. So you have a new colleague taking up the work of the data quality checks. And there they're like, okay, I have a check that is failing, but what does it mean? What is the context? And the worst part is that this information at some point was co-owned between business and IT. It was there, but it was used to build the data product, and then it was lost or it was archived into like a documentation system that is actually not tied to your active components, for example, data quality monitoring. So if you look at those things in terms of systems, it's all very clear. And I would say to, let's say, mid-level managers, or the opposition between business and IT needs to end.
Mm-hmm.
What you are working with is systems, which involve technology, people, organization.
Yeah.
If you have this agnostic view, then you don't care, like you don't get dragged down into like, oh, okay, it's Spark or it's Polars, and we're going to change the framework, whatever. Okay, that's engineer talk, that's fine. You have input, you have output, you have expectation, you have those kind of things. You have a systemic view on how things are working or not. So if at some point information coalesce for the development process, and then at another point of your value stream, you need that same information, that's a metadata management use case. How can we coalesce that information so that it's reusable in the system later on without extra cost? And then your ROI is clear. You like, again, in lean methodology, muda, like waste, you avoid waste. If you do the same work 2 times, then your ROI is very clear. Now we do it 1 time.
Mm-hmm. And then would you say then that the focus of data management, metadata management, is because I like what you mentioned about the co-ownership between IT and business.
Yeah.
And I think that's also where my mind goes as to the focus of metadata management, because most of the time these things are co-owned.
Yeah.
And bringing these two different profiles to work together, where organizationally usually they're not
Yeah.
working together.
And that's why also like to the list of things that I'm a bit skeptical of. Like you have IT business. I usually tend to. I understand the reality of it, and of course we all speak like that, and it's fine. But we also need to be able to take a step back from this. Another things that I tend to be skeptical of is this obsession of considering architecture in terms of layers. So there is, of course, a good like use case for decomposing your architecture into layers, like physical, logical, conceptual, information layer, knowledge layer, whatever. Yeah, it's a decomposition, so it can serve like an analytical purpose and can help the design. Fine. The problem is that in many companies, it ends up becoming organization domains. So, for example, you will have business architects, and their domain is information layer. So they can do whatever they want there. They have the budget, but if they start to, I don't know, like consider the physical layer and stuff like that, that's another branch. That's system architects or head of engineering and so on. So you have this decomposition that first was analytical, but it quickly becomes organizational, it quickly becomes reified. And when you do metadata management, what you realize is that you actually have to cut across those layers. If you do data quality, you are going to need to deliver information that is both technical and business. There's no way around it. And you will have to attach various kind of sources information together into an artifact to streamline your production process, your production system.
I also, well, and I agree. I like what you said as well. I agree that this is very true for metadata management. I also think this is true for many other fields. Like, I even think like if it's like MLOps or something like this, that you have two different fields and you need expertise from both. But then I'm also thinking that a lot of the times, organizationally, companies are not ready, like are not set up for this, right? Like you said, there's like vertical stacks, and then what you're proposing now, which I also agree, is to have the perpendicular cuts. So it's like a bit of each. So they're self-sufficient teams within the domain.
Yep.
But then that also means that these decisions, the solutions to these problems also need to come a bit vertical.
I mean, yes, but you can also like, I mean, I'm not going to publicly advocate for shadow development, but let's just say that that's where the trade-off needs to be done, right? Like, I think a lot of folks in metadata management and data governance, they get a bit trapped with like this idea of, okay, we are going to go like full blown, like we're going to get like a data platform, stuff like that. But there is a cost with that. You become highly visible. You need a lot of budget. The bottom line is really like tight. While if you're like, okay, we have a stack, right? We have a current architecture. How is it working right now? Okay, actually, we have notebooks. We have like things running. We have Git, whatever. The question would be, what can you already do with that? And then your needs for specific budget and so on is going to be much lower, which is going to make you more agile into testing different things, into reworking the processes on the edges. It's not as shiny as saying like, oh, we are going to do a full migration to be like ready for AI and stuff like that. If you really want to be ready for AI or for anything, first you have to learn about the current systems. First you have to really get a grip on your own organization. And for that, you shouldn't like ask for big budgets. You should really try to iterate as fast as possible and as small as possible. So don't get too concerned about scope. Definitely. Don't even get too concerned about scale. I know that's, you're not supposed to say that sometimes, but you're not a data architect, right? So the game is different. Don't get too concerned about scale and just focus on impact. Localized, like as quickly as possible. If you make an impact, you gain some capital within the organization. You're someone who's actually delivered value. And then you use that and you do something a bit bigger, and then something a bit bigger, and you expand and you rework. And you will get a lot of goodwill, and you will also help upper management, because the reality is, if you're a CDO or a CIO, you are in constant danger of having your whole department and teams be considered as cost centers.
Mhm.
That is the reality of the industry right now, and it's been for a while, but people are really like grappling with this.
Mhm.
And so that is where you can help, and you can buy a lot of goodwill, including from upper management, that can then free up more budget because you have like embedded ROI into your approach.
And so you need sustained value, but earlier you talked about being very pragmatic and so on.
Yeah.
So how, as a CIO or CDO, would you then make a case for upper management if it's very pragmatic and hands-on?
Yeah. So basically what you can do is first try to tie what you're doing to existing issues. For example, if you really like adopt like a problem solving, approach, I've never seen an organization where there are no problems. So just tie what you're doing to existing problems, and then show that they are actually getting less of a problem. Like that's universal language, right? Like just fixing things. Everybody understand that. If you say, yeah, we are going to increase our capability for AI by being more semantically ready, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, great. Sounds great. I don't know what it means. However, if you say, you know what, from the three previous release cycles, they were always those kind of issues, and it cost us like you give a guesstimate of X FTE whatever, and then you say the root cause was analyzed by the department, and we actually fixed things in that short amount of time, and now we won't have this problem anymore. Everybody can understand that. That's very clear. And if you think that metadata is not playing a role, then look closer, because actually you can speed up processes.
And so you'd focus on proof points. You've been discussing building capabilities earlier, process, people, technology. As we're nearing the end of the talk, let's say, do you have very concrete use cases or examples?
Yeah. So I touched upon it when we discussed about like acceptance criteria. So basically there, you are going to design a data product, and you are going to encode a lot of information. The way you encode that information, it can be in a knowledge base, and then it's completely inactive. It's completely passive. So for example, if someone doesn't check the documentation, then, too bad, information is lost. If you encode it into an active component of your system, for example, a data quality check that runs automatically, you can surface that information automatically. So you can actually, at any point in the release cycle, know what acceptance criteria are actually satisfied. For real, not the intention when you were building your data product, but now, as your systems are running, this is the value that is currently created. So that's a perfect use case, because it ties up metadata and data quality, and it gives a view that is both readable for business and IT, and it actually demonstrates the quantum of value that your systems are producing at any given point. And so there, depending on the ecosystem, I could talk about different tools like, Zephyr, Soda, we mentioned, like whatever. It can be, test cases, can be data quality monitoring. These are all the intricacies of the job, like depending on the organization. The philosophy is the same.
Yeah, no, very cool. So what I'm taking as well is metadata management is pretty much like data management, but biggest pain points or biggest challenges I see is where it intersects a lot with the governance part.
Yeah, and maybe like yes, and one of the difference maybe with data management is that with data management you are much closer to your primary activities of your value stream. So it also means that you are much closer to, let's say, the core architectural features of your ecosystem. So there, the one-way door is usually much more of a problem. So if we think about data modeling, if you get it wrong, that's very costly.
Yeah,
But
indeed.
here for metadata, you have way more agility,
Yeah.
which is kind of nice.
Yeah. No, indeed. And I think you mentioned like agility. So stay pragmatic,
Yeah.
solve problems. I also think there are some challenges in terms of management, right? Like, because a lot of times this is still coupled to organizational teams and having the cross section, or having also negotiating budgets as well, because it's sometimes a lot of companies, they have a large budget cycle. So to plan these things and to be able to say, I'm just going to work on this and that, but staying pragmatic, solving one problem at a time, I think, and then it kind of goes to all the other nice software engineering things that we know and love. Cool. Is there anything else? Maybe also to wrap up as well. I think Dataroots, we also do some things related to this.
Yeah, of course. So actually, we are really like ramping up our let's say strategy and offering related to metadata management, but also like and as a, let's say, recently newcomer at Dataroots, like I have also a kind of a fresh perspective on this, and it's really really nice because we do have different practice, right? Like but it's really not silos at all. So that's why also I'm very comfortable talking about, like those kind of distinction, I don't really care, or but it's actually because we are all working on this concrete, like value driven approach to data. So I'm talking to people who have the focus on data governance or data management or data quality. And of course we bring like different things, but in the end, like if it goes into the data governance stream, because there are budget there and it makes sense there considering this or that organization, then it flows naturally. So we have like let's say project ongoing about metadata management, but it's not a silo. It's not something that we want to actually like absolutely tag as such. So again, like for me, it's just there are problems to be tackled, right? Like, we need to solve things and create value. And so we have all the tools at our disposal, whether it's about data governance, data management, metadata management, data quality, doesn't really matter. It's there are pain points, we are going to solve them. And that mindset is really, really nice.
Yeah, and I think that's something that it's part of Dataroots DNA, I would say. I think it's even with there, you can apply the same thing in other fields. I remember when I started with AI, neural networks was the sexiest thing, and then I was like, yeah, this, but realistically, a lot of the times you don't need it. There's a lot of very simple things you can do before. I mean, you can still do the sexy stuff later, but is there a need for that, right? Like, let's focus on, we're here to solve problems. We're not here to, do resume driven development. This is the craziest thing. Just like, oh yeah, I did that one time. Very cool. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think you brought some very nice perspective. You mentioned I shouldn't say this a lot, and still you said it.
A lot.
I remember shadow IT and so on, but it's nice to have these bold statements, and I agree with all of them. So
yeah, and it's the reality, right? Like you do have like some leeway sometimes, or you have like some margins of freedom in an organization. It's also how you use them, right?
I would be very curious. We'd be very happy to have you again, coming back to see one example, like end to end, like a bit of
I
like
was thinking the same
in a story format, and see how all these things come together. Because I think, again, a lot of topics, but metadata management is very peculiar, because we talked from like data quality checks in the columns, so something super narrow, super specific, super data engineering, and we also talk about how you organize teams and CIO and CDO, right? So I think there's a lot of different levels, and it will be really cool to see it all coming together in an example. So we'll be happy to have you again in the future.
Yeah, indeed. And we didn't talk about Gen AI.
Well, we almost made it, huh? Like almost the whole thing, and then Ben we should have like quack, quack, quack. You know, like every week we're like, maybe let's see if we can have one episode without. But yeah,
I'm just saying there's indeed a lot of follow-up potential.
there is there
So
is
happy to
for sure,
host you
for sure,
again.
for sure. Yeah, that is true. And there's the whole thing that we talked last time with Paulo with the unstructured data
Yeah.
and like what can we do about these things as well. So there's a lot of the different ways. But thank you a lot for your time. It was really nice chat.
Thank you.
Gave me a lot of stuff to think about as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Alex. And no rest.
You have taste
Okay, no rest.
in a way that's meaningful
Yes.
to software people.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates.
I would recommend TypeScript. Yeah, it writes a lot of code for me, and usually it's slightly wrong.
I'm reminded, incidentally, of Rust here.
Thus,
This almost makes me happy that I didn't become a supermodel.
Cooper and Netties.
Boy, I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about large neural networks. It's really an honor to be here.
Rust.
Data topics.
Welcome to the data.
Welcome to the Datatopics podcast.
Ciao. But can I do it? I don't know if it's unplugged still, but